"Get out of the way. Old poor women like you don't deserve to stand here." That was how my own daughter-in-law, Brianna Sloan, opened her mouth to me in the middle of the hotel lobby, the very place I had quietly invested in for years. She snatched the room card from my hand, glanced at me with contempt, then smirked. "Even if you paid for it, so what? How I use it is my right." She was wrong, completely wrong. She thought I was a shadow, thought I held no value, thought I would stay silent forever. But just a moment later, when the receptionist looked at the screen and turned pale, her world collapsed. You're Marvette Hale. Please forgive us. We must escort you to the VIP area immediately." The entire lobby fell silent. And Brianna, she froze on the spot, unaware that the security footage was capturing every word of the scheme she and Lucas had plotted. Now tell me, if you were me, would you swallow the humiliation or step forward and reclaim everything? If you were Brianna, would you keep lying or tremble before the truth? And when the police storm in, would you resist or fall to your knees? Follow my channel and comment, what would you do if your daughter-in-law dared to insult you like that? I have always believed that power does not always need to be displayed. Sometimes silence becomes a stronger armor than any declaration. I lived that way for nearly 10 years, ever since Richard passed away and left me a world he had built with half a lifetime of effort. From that day on, I closed the loud doors of the business world and chose to stand behind them where no one could see me, where I could observe everything with the calm eyes of someone who understood the value of quiet. I often said a sentence to myself each morning when facing the mirror, a sentence that kept my heart steady amid all the changes. I am silent not because I am weak. I simply do not want to use power unless it is truly necessary. And apparently that very silence made a few people mistake it for an opportunity to overstep. I am Marvette Hale, widow of Richard Hale, the man who laid the foundation for the Hale Group hotel empire known throughout this city. His position once made many tremble at the sound of the name Hale. A portion of that power now lies in my hands, though I never needed to speak of it to prove anything. 30% of the company's shares is no small figure, yet I hold it like a secret. Executive board meetings, I delegate. Press appearances, I refuse. I kept myself behind the wooden doors of my seaside home, living slow, living gentle, like someone who no longer belonged to that world of power. And slowly, people forgot that I could change an entire meeting with just one signature. They forgot that I once sat beside Richard through fiery negotiations. They forgot that this position did not come easily, but I never blamed them for forgetting. I allowed them to forget because I chose anonymity for the sake of peace of mind, until today. When I stepped into the lobby of Hale Downtown Hotel, the familiar scent of luxury mixed with cool air conditioning brushed past me. I had walked through this place more times than I could count, but it had been years since I last came. Everything remained polished and bright, only the eyes of the staff had changed with time. They looked at me like any ordinary guest. No recognition, no respect, and certainly no hint of deference. I smiled. That is what I wanted when I stepped out of the spotlight. Yet that very normalcy made it easier for them to make mistakes. I handed my ID card to the receptionist when he asked to check my reservation. He held it, glanced at it, and typed a few characters into his computer. Perhaps only at that moment did the quiet world I had kept around myself begin to crack. His expression suddenly stalled, as if something on the screen did not match. At first, just a small frown. Then suddenly, his eyes widened until I could clearly see the shock spreading through them. He looked at me, then at the screen, as though terrified he had just made a grave mistake. He shot up from his chair, pushing it back so abruptly it scraped sharply across the polished floor. His voice trembled slightly before he blurted out the sentence that made a few people around turn to look. You're Marfit Hale? Dear God, please forgive us. We must escort you to the VIP area immediately. From that moment on, the atmosphere in the lobby changed color. A few seconds earlier, I was just a dark-skinned woman in simple clothing, waiting in line like any other guest. A few seconds later, the eyes around me shifted from indifference to respect, mixed with a hint of uneasy awe. The sudden shift felt like a gust of wind slamming into stillness. It made me realize that no matter how long I tried to hide the name, Hale still carried a weight people could not ignore. I did not blame the receptionist for his panic. Those trained within the Hale system understood very clearly the list of individuals they must prioritize above all. My name was in that group. It was a rule Richard left behind, and after he passed, no one dared to change it. The receptionist was not wrong. The only mistake belonged to someone else, someone who believed I would always be a gentle, reserved woman incapable of resistance, someone who thought my silence was an empty seat she could step on, crush, and laugh triumphantly over. That person is my daughter-in-law, Brianna Sloan, and she is the reason I will have to step out of the silence I have protected for far too long. I never imagined there would be a day when I stood in the lobby of a hotel bearing my family's name and was treated like an unnecessary guest. Yet just after I stepped away from the reception desk, the sharp rhythm of Brianna's high heels echoed across the marble floor as if she were rushing toward me to assert her dominance. She stopped in front of me, her eyes cold, overly confident, with no attempt to hide her contempt. Watching the way she scanned the lobby, I understood immediately that Brianna believed this was her stage, a place where everyone must revolve around her presence. She waved her hand as if she were in charge of the entire hotel, directing staff with a tone that never belonged to an ordinary guest. When an employee approached to offer assistance, Brianna dismissed him, then turned toward me with a triumphant expression. Your room. I gave it to my friends. They're more important. Each word dropped out of her mouth like a sharp blade, implying that I stood lower than her friends, that I wasn't even worth the respect given to a passing stranger. In that moment, I felt as if she didn't see me as the elder of the family at all, only an obstacle to her convenience. I drew a breath, trying to keep my tone steady. I paid for that room. I hoped she would pause, reflect, or at least feel a hint of embarrassment when reminded of that simple fact. But Brianna only smiled, the corner of her mouth lifting with a mocking tilt as she folded her arms. Even if you paid, so what? How I use it is my right. Her voice was firm, sharp, cold as steel. Her gaze slid over me from head to toe as if she were assessing an old, useless object abandoned in a corner. Seeing that expression, something in my chest tightened, not from her insult alone, but because I realized something bigger. Brianna truly believed she had the right to step on others. She didn't see me as a mother-in-law, didn't see me as an elder, and certainly didn't see me as someone who belonged to this family. In her eyes, I was merely the last obstacle she needed to remove before taking what she believed she deserved. I turned to Ethan. He stood right beside her, his face showing a tension he couldn't hide. Since marrying Brianna, he had grown quieter, more hesitant, and often looked at her as if waiting for permission. I called to him softly, hoping he would speak. Ethan, say something. I wanted to hear his voice to know whether he still had enough courage to stand beside his mother. But the moment Ethan opened his mouth, Brianna immediately tightened her grip on his hand, pulling him back with a motion sharp enough to startle him. She leaned toward him, her eyes slicing into him with a clear warning, then said with a voice soaked in control, "Keep your mouth shut. Every decision here is mine." Ethan lowered his head at once, his shoulders shrinking, as if carrying a heavy weight that pushed him deeper into her shadow. In that instant, I couldn't decide whether I was more stunned or heartbroken. I watched my son, unable to raise his head, unable to speak a word to defend his own mother. It felt like witnessing someone extinguishing a flame that once burned brightly inside him. I realized Brianna didn't just look down on me. She had bent Ethan to the point he no longer recognized his own voice. I opened my mouth to say something when the receptionist appeared beside me. He stepped close, lowering his voice as if afraid someone might overhear. His face was tense, his eyes shifting from me to Brianna as though caught between a secret he urgently needed to reveal. He leaned slightly toward me and whispered, delivering a sentence that sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Ma'am, you need to follow me. There's something more dangerous than you think." The receptionist led me away from the lobby through a narrow corridor behind a stone wall. The atmosphere inside the hallway felt different from the outside, quiet enough for me to hear my own footsteps against the floor. He walked ahead, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his steps faster than normal, as if trying to conceal the tension rising in him. I did not ask anything, simply observed that unsettled behavior, waiting to see what could unsettle a Hale Group employee so greatly, especially after realizing who I was. When we stopped in front of a large door framed with frosted glass, he adjusted his tie as a reflex that revealed both his fear and his effort to maintain composure. He turned toward me, his voice lower and more serious than before. "Mrs. Hale, this is a serious issue. Your VIP record has been altered." In his eyes, I saw not only respect, but the panic of someone who understood the danger of what he had discovered. The door opened, revealing the VIP room I had not stepped into for 10 years, even though it was designed specifically for the most important shareholders. The room glowed with soft lighting, the faint scent of essential oils drifting from a corner, creating a quiet luxury I had once been familiar with. The surveillance screens mounted on the walls displayed streams of information, making the place feel wrapped in a secrecy known only to a select few. The receptionist led me to the central control desk. "Your file was accessed using an account from the restricted list, and 2 critical pieces of information were changed." He handed me a system summary. Each line that appeared felt like a fresh cut across the trust I once held for people around me. I looked at the altered items, feeling a cold shiver along my spine. My backup email had been replaced with a strange address. My primary contact number had also been updated to one that did not belong to me. Even my VIP account access had been reassigned in a way far too precise to be accidental. I held the report in my hand, realizing the familiarity in the way these changes were made, too similar to how someone knowledgeable about the Hale Group system would operate. My mind drifted back to an afternoon 3 months ago when I was clearing out Richard's old office. I opened boxes of old documents, catching the faint scent of paper and wood that he always loved. Brianna arrived at that moment, saying she wanted to help me organize. Her voice was gentle, her eyes showing a sympathy that at the time I believed was sincere. I paid no attention when she picked up the box containing Richard's important documents and set it aside. I didn't take notice when she held my VIP card, turning it between her fingers with the excuse of admiring the new logo. And I certainly didn't notice when she lifted her phone to snap pictures of several items she claimed were memories to keep for the family. Today, those scenes resurfaced in my mind like pieces of a puzzle, revealing something far darker. The receptionist opened another file, pointing at 3 items flagged for unusual access. First, my VIP card. Then, the shareholder account access code. And finally, the backup email Richard created years ago, something even Ethan didn't know about. The person who changed these details could not have been an outsider. They needed to understand the system, the verification process, and how to manipulate sensitive information without leaving obvious traces. That realization made me think of Brianna's job before marrying Ethan. She once worked in the events department at Hale West. I always assumed she handled planning and coordination, but perhaps I underestimated her familiarity with the internal system. I set the report down and examined the list of altered details as though studying a carefully arranged painting. Everything aligned in a way that chilled me. Brianna didn't simply want a portion of my assets. She wanted something larger, deeper, more venomous. She doesn't just want the assets, she wants to become me. The words slipped out as the cold at the back of my neck intensified. That intention went far beyond money. It revealed her ambition to claim the position she believed was the highest prize, the position of a Hale. I tightened my hand on the desk, feeling a tremor in my bones that I rarely experienced. In that moment, the receptionist returned with another data file marked in red. He placed it in front of me, his voice tauter than before. "Mrs. Hale, this is yesterday's system access video." The receptionist placed the red-labeled data file on the control desk, his fingertips trembling as he pressed the video icon. I stood behind him, my heartbeat heavy, partly from anger, partly from fear of what I was about to see. When the screen lit up, the VIP room seemed to grow colder, even though the air conditioning stayed at the same temperature. The dim light of the monitor fell across my face, making me feel as though I was standing before a truth I could no longer avoid. Brianna appeared first. Not the soft-spoken Brianna I once believed existed. The woman on the screen was someone entirely different. Her makeup so sharp, it hardened her whole expression. She sat tilted on a chair, one hand holding a vape, exhaling trails of white smoke that blended with the light, as if she were stepping into the role of the villain she wanted to become. Her eyes lifted with arrogance, and her voice was low yet razor sharp. Her beach house, it's about to be mine. A weak woman like her is easy to deal with. My chest tightened. I heard the words "her" fall from Brianna's lips, each syllable hitting me like a cold blow. The way she talked about me sounded like she was describing something disposable, an obstacle that needed to be removed. I wondered if she had ever looked at me with true respect, or if everything had been a mask waiting for the right day to fall away. The vape smoke in the video created a haze that darkened the scene, but it also exposed Brianna's true nature more clearly than ever. The video kept playing. Brianna tilted her head, a mocking laugh escaping her lips and making the room feel tighter. Ethan is soft like dough. I tell him to sign, he signs. A weak man deserves to be used. I heard every word clear enough that denial was impossible. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part went numb. Ethan, the boy I raised through my entire youth, the child who always ran to me when he scraped his knees, was now being called a tool deserving to be used. A chill ran through my whole body, not from the cold room, but from realizing my son had been demeaned by the person sleeping beside him every night. A tool, the two words clenched around my heart. I no longer felt anger for myself, but anger for him, for the way he had been manipulated into losing his sense of self. This truth hurt more deeply than any insult Brianna had thrown at me in the lobby. I looked at the receptionist. His face had drained of color, his lips pressed together as if restraining his own reaction. He didn't look at me immediately. He inhaled, steadied himself, then turned with eyes filled with indignation on my behalf. "Ma'am, there is another part, and it is worse." His voice dropped as if preparing me for a second blow. I saw the respect in the way he chose his words, but also the genuine fear of knowing how serious everything behind this scheme had become. He clicked to the next video. The screen blinked, shifting to a darker scene with a faint, warm light hanging from above. From the camera angle, I saw a desk, several papers scattered across the surface, and Brianna's voice coming from the corner outside the view. She was speaking to someone. Her laugh was low and steady, as though the plan was already celebrating its success. I held my breath. Another figure stepped into the frame. I recognized the tall posture and broad shoulders instantly. Lucas Sloan, Brianna's older brother. A man I never trusted because his eyes always looked like they were searching the room for leverage. The two of them leaned close together. Brianna held up a contract, flipping through it like a trophy while Lucas rested his hand on the desk with a cold smile. I watched Brianna tilt her head, her voice quiet but captured perfectly by the microphone. "As long as Ethan signs, all the assets in the beach property will transfer to our names. He won't suspect a thing. He loves me enough to be blind." Lucas chuckled. His voice echoed through the small space, coated in the arrogance of someone convinced victory was certain. "Tomorrow he signs, and it's done." The video shifted again, the screen dimming before brightening to reveal a wider angle of the room where Brianna and Lucas had met. The warm light fell across Lucas's face, showing every line of that cunning smile and the calculating glint in his eyes. He leaned against the edge of the table, his hand still resting on the contract like someone accustomed to manipulating others. His voice rose slow but full of confidence, sending a chill down my spine. "Once that fool Ethan signs, the house is ours." Brianna stood beside him, her heavily made-up face rigid, her eyes gleaming as if she had just listened to a victory speech. She nodded, her lips lifting in a faint smirk. "You handle the paperwork. I'll handle Ethan." Her voice carried no affection, no respect toward her husband, and certainly no hint of love. It sounded like the voice of someone who had mastered the art of controlling a puppet. Watching her in that moment made the world tilt in a way that confused my breath. Lucas continued speaking, his fingers tapping lightly against the desk. "He's stupid, believes everything you say. Let him think you're defending him. When it's done, we split it." Brianna laughed, a short, sharp sound that made the air in the VIP room tighten further. Their words struck me like needles, each one piercing deeper. They spoke about my son as if he were an object, something convenient, something to divide, something constructed solely for their plan. I felt my hand tremble as I placed it on the control desk. Part of me wanted to smash the screen to erase the cruel image, but another part forced me to stand still, to watch until the end so I could understand the full extent of their betrayal. The pain tightened in my chest like a blade being pushed inward, making me press my free hand over my heart, trying to steady my breathing. "They are using my son." The words left my lips in a choked whisper, as if speaking them hurt even more than hearing the truth. Images of Ethan as a child flashed through my mind, running toward me with dirt-covered hands. I heard his young voice calling, "Mom." Remembered the words he said after Richard died, promising he would protect me no matter what. And now that same boy had been twisted into someone who no longer recognized his own voice. I did not know which pain was greater, the pain of hearing them treat him like a possession, or the pain of knowing he was too weak to defend himself. The receptionist stood beside me, his eyes burning with anger he tried to hide. He said nothing, allowing me the time to breathe through the ache. The room felt heavy with my own heartbeat, a weight carried by grief and fury at once. It took me several seconds to regain control to let the trembling inside me settle. Then I braced my hands against the table and straightened my back. I felt something shift within me, like the cruel truth had ignited the part of me I had buried for years. I kept quiet because I am kind. My voice was steady, no longer shaking. I looked at the screen again at Brianna's face in the video, as if staring directly at the woman who had crossed every boundary. But today, I will remind them who I am. There was no softness left in my voice, only the tone of a woman who once stood behind Richard during the biggest negotiations in Hale Group's history. A woman who knew how to protect what belonged to her, and more importantly, a mother. I turned to the receptionist. He looked at me differently now, with a mixture of respect and readiness to stand with me. I didn't need him to say anything else. My anger was no longer something that clouded my mind. It had become the strength pushing me toward a step I should have taken long ago, a step back into the position I had allowed others to forget. I drew a deep breath. Take me to the lobby. I will speak to her myself. I stepped out of the VIP room with a completely different state of mind from when I entered. The hallway leading to the lobby was long and quiet, the light reflecting softly off the polished floor, making each of my steps feel heavier with meaning. The receptionist walked beside me, saying nothing, and that silence felt like the final preparation before the large doors opened. When I turned left, the noise of the hotel lobby rushed back, but it did not drown out the steady breath rising in my chest. It was time to end the charade Brianna was still so confident standing on. Brianna stood in the center of the lobby, arms crossed, her head tilted in challenge. When she saw me, she flashed a thin smile filled with contempt. "You're here to apologize. Hurry up." Her voice carried just enough for several guests to turn. That smile showed her complete belief that everything was still in her control, that I remained the silent, weak woman she had been comfortable underestimating since stepping into the Hale family. Her confidence showed she had no idea what was about to happen. I approached her, each step slow but deliberate. Each step closed the distance between us while lifting me back into the position that had always been mine. When I stopped in front of her, my gaze met hers, and she stepped back half a pace. "I am here to end the illusion that you have any authority on Hale property." My voice was calm, yet each syllable fell like a blade drawn after years of remaining sheathed. The lobby fell silent at once. For the first time, they saw me standing exactly where I belonged. No longer the gentle mother-in-law or the woman who stayed in the corner of meeting rooms. I held my gaze on Brianna, watching the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She tried to keep her posture firm, but her breath hitched and her crossed arms shifted slightly. She opened her mouth to speak, but the receptionist stepped forward first. His face no longer held fear, but the solemnity I had once seen in those who directly served Richard. He stood opposite Brianna, his voice ringing clear in the crowded space. "The penthouse reserved for Mrs. Hale is open. Anyone named Brianna Sloan is permanently banned." The statement cracked through the air like thunder. Several guests turned sharply toward Brianna while she jolted upright as if drenched in ice water. "No, you can't do that to me," she screamed, her voice warping with shock and fear. The proud mask she had worn collapsed instantly, exposing the panic she could no longer hide. Thinking of the videos I had watched moments before, I knew her terror wasn't about being banned. It was because her entire plan to seize the Hale estate was collapsing. The receptionist remained steady, not stepping back, not flinching. She can, and she has the right. His final words landed like a verdict. Brianna turned toward me, her eyes flittering between rage and desperation. Each breath she took seemed to collide with the truth she could no longer escape. That the entire game had been overturned in a single moment by the very power she never believed I possessed. I looked at her without needing to say a word. Everything had already been said in my silence. The silence she believed gave her permission to control my life, my son, and the Hale property. But now, silence had become the sharpest weapon in my hand, and Brianna understood that because for the first time, I saw fear inside her eyes. The air in the lobby tightened until even a small sound could shatter the moment. Then, from behind us, a guard's voice cut through the tension, deep and decisive. He moved quickly toward us, his eyes focused on me, as if confirming I was ready to hear what came next. The police are on their way. The air in the lobby seemed to thicken after the words, "The police are coming." Everyone remained standing, watching, but no one dared speak. The sense of waiting pressed onto every breath. I could hear my own heartbeat slow and heavy, counting down the seconds before the final curtain fell. In the crowd, Ethan stepped forward, his face pale, his eyes red and lost. He looked at Brianna being held back, looked at me, then looked around as though he no longer recognized the life unfolding around him. The way he stood, his hands hanging, his shoulders slumped, reminded me of the 17-year-old boy who first realized his father would never come home again. Except today, the loss wasn't of someone gone, but of trust shattered right in front of him. The hotel manager moved up from behind, holding a printed stack of documents. He placed the folder on the reception counter, opened the first page, and looked straight at Ethan. His voice was solid, articulated, without a trace of hesitation. He has fraud convictions in 3 states. This is public record. He pushed the documents slightly toward Ethan, as though presenting a truth no one could deny. Ethan stared down at the page, his hand frozen halfway before touching it. His eyes scanned each line, each detail about Lucas Sloan, the charges, the amount stolen, the investigations, the escapes. Every word hit him like a strike to the head, draining the color from his face. He swallowed hard, lips shaking, and when he looked up, horror and humiliation were mixed together in his eyes. "No, that can't be," Ethan whispered, his voice so faint only the manager and I could hear. He turned toward Lucas, who was still trying to look calm, but whose feet had already shifted backward toward the exit. Lucas's jaw clenched, his expression stiff, but his eyes flickered with panic. He looked away, as though unable to endure the weight of Ethan's gaze. I saw Ethan's shoulders tremble. He turned to me, tears spilling down his face, his voice breaking apart. "Mom, I forgot who you are. I let them control me." Those words cut through my heart like a blade, not because they blamed me, but because the regret inside them was so heavy I could feel it in my own bones. I placed my hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently to steady him. "What matters is that you woke up." My voice was low, even needing no force. I held his gaze, letting him see that no matter what had happened, the door back to his family was still open if he would walk through it. Ethan pressed his lips together, tears falling, but he nodded. That nod was a promise to himself more than to me. Brianna, held a few steps away by two guards, heard everything. She let out a laugh, hoarse, twisted, scraped raw from her throat. Touching, isn't it? She lifted her head, her eyes locking on Ethan. Without me, you're nothing. Weak men. Each word shot through the air like needles. She wasn't hiding her contempt anymore. Ethan flinched as if slapped. I saw his hands curl into fists, his nails digging into his palms. He didn't respond with words, but his expression shifted. The weakness began to fall away, replaced by a fracture in his pride, deep and painful. Words he once tolerated from her had now become the final verdict on what they were. I looked at Brianna, sensing that her cruelty had ripened past the point of return. This woman wasn't only greedy, she took pleasure in stepping on the pain of others. The way she spat out the word weak made it clear that she had never intended to build anything, only to dominate. Lucas stood off to the side, wedged between two guards. He glanced at Brianna, a flicker of blame in his eyes. Perhaps he thought she had revealed too much. But it was too late. The documents had been read, the videos were seen, their own voices had echoed through the hotel lobby before dozens of witnesses. Ethan looked back at Lucas, and this time his gaze was steady, not fearful, not confused, clear. A man finally seeing how thoroughly he'd been tangled in someone else's trap. I couldn't hear his thoughts, but the grip of his hand on my arm tightened. He was grounding himself on me, on the truth, on the only thing left unchanged. Brianna must have sensed that the tide had completely turned. She looked around, eyes darting, seeing the same hotel employees who once greeted her politely, now staring coldly, sternly distant. No hands reached for her, no sympathetic glances, only the silent witnessing of the final act of a collapsing facade. The air grew so still that I heard the sound of footsteps from the front entrance, heavy, quick, accompanied by the static crackle of police radios. Heads turned in unison, the crowd parting instinctively, forming a walkway. The doors burst open, slamming against the wall with a sharp, solid crack. A group of officers entered, uniforms, dark boots striking hard on the floor. The streetlights behind them stretched their shadows across the tiles. The tension dropped another level. They didn't scan the room long. Their eyes locked instantly onto Lucas. He recoiled, eyes widening with terror. One officer stepped forward, his voice firm, decisive, filling the lobby without needing volume. "Lucas Sloan, you are under arrest." The chaos in the hotel lobby had not subsided at all after Lucas was handcuffed. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cars outside spilled across the stone floor, creating cold streaks of color that made the atmosphere even heavier. I stood there in the place where every gaze had gathered, fully aware that this moment marked the boundary between silence and power. Brianna looked around her, breath sharp, her hair disheveled, her eyes filled with terror as she watched her plan crumble layer by layer. Ethan stood behind me, as if finally finding a place to anchor himself, but I knew that was not enough. I had seen all the videos, heard every word they spoke about my son, about me, about the Hale estate. If I stopped here, Brianna would still have a gap to slip through. I had stayed silent for far too long, and now it was time to use the authority Richard entrusted me with. I lifted my hand, taking my phone from my pocket. The soft background music in the lobby stopped when the manager signaled, making the space fall into a tense stillness. Brianna narrowed her eyes at me, her brow furrowing as if she could sense something was about to strike. I dialed, raised the phone to my ear, and when the person on the other end answered, my voice dropped low, sharp enough for the entire lobby to hear. activate the Hale shareholder financial lock. Every asset tied to me, freeze it immediately." No one breathed louder than a whisper after that statement. Brianna's face drained in an instant, her lips trembling as though she could feel the storm crashing toward her. The voice on the other end replied immediately without needing me to say anything twice. "Understood, Mrs. Hale." The lawyer's voice rang firm, decisive, like a blade severing the final thread Brianna had been clinging to. I lowered my hand, ending the call. The lobby seemed frozen for a moment. Brianna stared at me, her eyes wide with panic. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, the screen flashing against the floor tiles. She snatched it out, swiping frantically to unlock it, but the more she swiped, the tighter her face twisted as the truth unfolded. Then she screamed, sharp as glass, "Why is my account locked?" She stumbled back a step, then another, her hands shaking as she held the phone like a traitor. Everyone watched her, while I remained still, not needing to move, not needing to raise my voice. I looked directly into her terrified eyes and spoke with the calmest tone I had used that entire day. "It was never yours." Just one sentence, and the entire lobby seemed to tremble. Brianna stood frozen, unable to believe what she had heard. She clutched her chest, gasping as if the air itself was slipping away from her. She tried tapping the screen again, but every tap brought the same red notice: "Account locked, contact legal." She turned to Ethan, desperate for something to hold on to. "Ethan, I didn't do anything wrong. She's lying. This is all your mother's fault." But Ethan lowered his head, giving a small shake as though waking from a long dream. Brianna clenched her jaw, her face flushing with rage. "You will regret this," she screamed, her voice ripping apart between fury and despair. She lunged toward me, but the guards stepped in, instantly blocking her. She hit their arms, pushing, clawing, but her strength was nothing compared to theirs. Each breath she drew now sounded like a cornered animal, trapped with no place left to run. I watched her, without stepping back, without blinking. Perhaps this was the first time Brianna truly saw me, as I was not the quiet woman, not the accommodating mother-in-law, but a Hale, someone with authority, inside a system she believed she could sabotage. Brianna turned from me to the manager, to the receptionist, to every staff member nearby, her eyes begging, threatening, demanding someone stand with her. But no one moved, because they had all seen the truth through those videos. Brianna exhaled sharply, her hair falling across her face, making her look even more unhinged. "No, no, this can't be real," she muttered, stumbling backward like someone losing balance. In her eyes, everything had collapsed. Her accounts locked, her scheme destroyed, Lucas arrested, Ethan no longer under her control, and the entire hotel standing on my side. I watched her falter, my voice no longer a weapon, but a truth she could not escape. "You chose the wrong person to wage war against, Brianna." Brianna jerked her head up, her eyes red and swollen. "I'll sue you. I'll take back everything," she screeched, her voice cracking through the lobby. But her words were cut short as the gleam of police uniforms entered once again. This time, their steps were slow, heavy, as if prepared for the next escalation. An officer stepped forward, his expression stern, his voice clear and resonant across the entire lobby. "Brianna Sloan, you need to come with us." The sound of handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the hotel lobby like a bell marking the end of all illusions. Lucas stood under the flashing lights of the police cars, his face drained, his hands pulled behind his back, his head bowed, like a man who had run out of excuses. Guests in the lobby stepped aside to clear a path, their expressions a mix of fear and grim satisfaction as they watched the man who believed he could manipulate my entire family being led away like a petty criminal. Silence blanketed the hotel, heavy enough that even the footsteps of each officer sounded sharp against the floor. An officer read out the charges, his voice cold and cutting through the air. "You are under arrest for fraud and forgery." Lucas lifted his head, his eyes trembling as if searching for a way out, but every exit was blocked by the truth. As he was pulled past me, he avoided my eyes, like someone who knew he had crossed a forbidden line and now had to pay for it with his future. I did not speak, but my silence in that moment felt sharper than any insult I could have hurled. Brianna stood a few steps away, her eyes glued to the sight of Lucas being dragged from the lobby. Her face turned pale, her hand clutching her own arm as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. But her terror was only beginning. When the officers turned toward her, Brianna staggered back, her mouth opening but no words coming out. One officer reached out a hand, voice firm. "Miss Brianna Sloan, please cooperate." She shook her head so violently, her hair tumbled out of its pins. "No, no, I didn't do anything," she screamed, her voice cracking. Then she turned to Ethan as if he were her last hope. "Ethan, help me. You know I love you. I was framed. You can't let them take me like this." Ethan looked at her, tears streaming down his face. It was perhaps the most painful moment of his life, confronting the truth that the person he loved most was the one who had betrayed him most deeply. "You destroyed this family." His voice broke, mixing with his shuddering breaths. "You loved yourself more than anything, even more than me." Brianna's eyes widened as if she couldn't believe those words came from Ethan's mouth. She lunged toward him, but the officers grabbed her arms and locked them behind her back. The metallic click made her face drain even paler. "No, Ethan, you have to believe me. You have to save me," she screamed, each word torn from her throat like an animal cornered. I took one step forward, close enough that she had no choice but to meet my eyes. Brianna froze for a heartbeat, sensing something she could not fight. I looked directly into her bloodshot eyes, my voice dropping low, each word striking the marble beneath us. "Do not mistake my silence for weakness." The entire lobby held its breath. The staff, who had seen me walk through this hotel as a quiet, gentle mother-in-law, now looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. Brianna's body stiffened, her face shifting from fury to despair. She could not deny it, nor could she fight it. Everything was exposed, and every defense she had collapsed into absurdity. The officers started to lead her away, but Brianna did not go quietly. She twisted her body, her eyes blazing with a fury fueled by the loss of everything she thought she owned. She tried to lunge toward me again, but the officers tightened their grip, dragging her more firmly. Her heel scraped across the floor, her crying cracked and harsh, stripped of all pride. Ethan watched her sobbing, clutching the back of a chair to keep from falling. I placed a hand on his shoulder, offering the steadiness he had lost. There was no need for more words. The truth was weight enough. Ethan leaned into me, and for the first time in many years, he allowed himself to be small, like the little boy who once cried into my shoulder. As the officers neared the door with Brianna in their grip, she jerked violently one last time, her eyes wild, her voice tearing across the lobby. "I will come back." 3 months after Brianna was handcuffed and taken out of the hotel lobby, my life and Ethan's slowly returned to the path we should have had long ago. News of the Hale incident spread across the media, each outlet printing its own angle, but all shared the same conclusion: public outrage toward Brianna and Lucas. I didn't care for public opinion, but I knew that for what they had done, the reckoning could not end in one chaotic night. The official sentencing was read in a courtroom packed with people. I sat in the second row, Ethan beside me, both of us silent. Brianna was escorted in her face pale, her eyes hollow, the hair she once groomed so meticulously, now tangled as though she had not slept in days. But what caught my attention was not her appearance, but the emptiness in her gaze. She knew there was no way back. The judge's voice was firm. Defendant Brianna Sloan, based on the evidence submitted, you are sentenced to 4 years of suspended imprisonment with 24 months of supervision. You are required to compensate Hale Group for damages as determined by the Financial Counsel. You are prohibited from contacting Mr. Ethan Hale for 5 years. You are placed on the statewide hotel blacklist, along with all restrictions pertaining to financial misconduct. I saw Brianna's head drop for a split second, as though her body had lost all strength. Her attorney leaned down to whisper something, but I knew no words could save her now. The sentence, though not jail time, was a chain far heavier than it appeared. 4 years suspended meant 4 years of every step monitored, every transaction tracked, every outing recorded. 24 months of strict supervision would turn her life into a shadow of someone who had once believed she stood above everyone else. The restitution wiped her accounts nearly to nothing. No organization dared hire someone with a record of forgery and fraud. The Sloan family issued a public statement cutting all ties to protect their reputation, leaving Brianna without the last pillar she could have leaned on. She was banned from every hotel in the state. Every place she once entered with pride now closed to her. But the heaviest blow was still the order forbidding her from approaching Ethan. When the court adjourned, Brianna was taken out through the back, while Ethan and I walked through the courthouse doors. The noon sunlight fell across us, but Ethan's mood was so heavy he had to pause just to breathe. I rested my hand on his shoulder gently, as I always had when he was small. He turned to me, his eyes red but clearer than before. "Mom, I won't let anyone hurt you ever again." His voice trembled but was sincere, the vow of a man who had just grown through a disaster. I looked at my son, and in his eyes I no longer saw blindness, no longer saw weakness being led around, but responsibility, clarity, and love for his family. I smiled, not broadly, but enough for him to see my pride. I was never weak. I simply chose not to use my strength. Ethan nodded, and I felt he had truly understood the lesson I had tucked inside my silence. Strength is not to be flaunted, but to be used at the right moment. That afternoon, I returned to the penthouse. The room was spacious, the breeze drifting in through the balcony, carrying the scent of the city at nightfall. I stood before the wide glass panel, looking out at thousands of scattered lights, where the lines of cars stretched like streams of moving brightness. I wondered if Richard could see this from somewhere. And if he could, would he smile knowing I had protected what we built? I slid open the balcony door and stepped outside. The night wind lifted my hair, filling my chest with cool air. The city below shimmered like a blanket of stars turned upside down. Each window a story, each road a different life. I stood there, letting the wind touch me, letting the weight of the past days finally settle. Power doesn't live in noise, I said softly into the night. It lives in silence at the right moment and in a voice that makes the world stop. I closed my eyes and breathed out slowly, releasing every lingering burden from this battle. My heart felt lighter, calmer, as if it had returned to its truest form, the heart of a hale woman who knows when to be silent, when to stand up, and when to force the world to shift. I turned to step back inside. At that moment, my phone on the table chimed, a small ding. I glanced at the screen, and my palm chilled slightly when I read the message displayed there. From Brianna Sloan. I stood by the glass window for a long moment, watching the city below shift into the warm gold of night. Life always finds its way to remind us true power doesn't need to be displayed, it reveals itself when the truth demands to be seen. I tapped my phone lightly, staring at Brianna's message with neither anger nor bitterness. All that remained was the calm of someone who had walked through the storm without losing herself. I whispered not to her, but to my own heart. Forgiveness is not opening the door for someone who betrayed you to return, but closing the door to the pain forever. I set the phone down, drew in a deep breath, and let a small smile rise. In the penthouse at the top of Hale Group, where the city lights wrapped around my shoulders like a new mantle, I understood today wasn't just the day I protected my family, it was the day I stepped back into the place I had avoided for far too long. And this time, I will move forward without fear of being hurt again, because I am Marvette Hale, and those who belong to me will know peace. In the end, I understood this. We don't need to shout to be heard. We simply stand tall, step forward, and let the truth speak for itself.